On December 29th, 2024, the 39th President of the United States and the last U.S. President farmer, Jimmy Carter, passed away. Today, we're going to explore the rich legacy the man leaves behind and the role that fresh produce and agriculture played in shaping his life. From his humble beginnings as a farmer in the small town of Plains, Georgia, to the office of U.S. President back to a U.S. civilian impacting the world. What can we learn from Jimmy Carter? And will we ever see the likes of such a man in the future again? Enjoy. My black playmates were the ones who joined me in the field work that was suitable for younger boys. We were the ones who toted fresh water to the more adult workers in the field. We mopped the cotton, turned sweet potato and watermelon vines, pruned deformed young watermelons, toted the stove wood, swept the yards, carried slop to the hogs, and gathered eggs, all thankless tasks. But we also rode mules and horses through the woods, jumped out of the barn loft into huge piles of oat straw, wrestled and fought, fished and swam. The early years of my life on the farm were full and enjoyable, isolated but not lonely. We always had enough to eat, no economic hardship, but no money to waste. We felt close to nature, close to members of our family, and close to God. And that, Patrick and everybody, was Jimmy Carter from his book, one of his many, many, many books, An Hour Before Daylight, which focused specifically on his early life. And as you may be gathering today, we will be doing a special episode on the life of Jimmy Carter through the lens, of course, of fresh produce. And Patrick, we were actually slated to record a completely different episode today, but given President Carter's death just, gosh, I think it's over a week now ago, and actually today being the day that we're recording this is the National Day of Mourning for Jimmy Carter. We thought we couldn't miss the opportunity to do an episode on Jimmy Carter because honestly, I mean, he is, as of now, the last farmer U.S. president that we've had.
Isn't that cool?
And it's really cool. And honestly, in the last week and a half, from the moment he died, I said, "Oh my gosh, we got to do an episode on him." I've been reading so much of his books.
You're getting into it.
Documentary. I feel like I know the guy personally now at this point. I really plunged myself deep into Jimmy Carter. And, regardless, and again, this episode's not going to be about his politics or really about his presidency. It's really about him as a person.
Right.
And honestly, all the stuff I've read about him and the documentaries I watched about him, I mean, what an amazing person, just a human being. I mean, in and out, just everything he stood for, the kind of person he was to everybody. And you'll get a sense of that when we walk through this today, but truly an amazing person. And likewise, his journey from a peanut farm in rural Georgia to the White House was also nothing short of remarkable at the end of the day. And we're going to point that out. So that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Oh, I love it. I think it's great. And, as I always talk about, and you hear me talk about it over and over again, is that our presidents, right, our congressmen, our senators, right, if you go back to the formation of, America, a lot of these were landowners and farmers, mm-hmm. right? I mean, there were businessmen and women. It wasn't just, I'm a lawyer, right? Yes, they were, but it was more than that. And, getting your hands dirty.
Yeah, I mean, not gentlemen farmers either. Like you said, they get actually plowing the fields. They're actually planting stuff into the ground. We've had we went through this in some of our president episodes at the beginning of last year when we, John Adams is a perfect example of that. He was a lawyer, but he was also a farmer, like hands in the ground farmer.
Yes.
And Jimmy Carter was a hands in the ground farmer, and you're going to hear about that today. There are some other that you can argue, well, John, what about, was it Lyndon B. Johnson or Reagan? Yeah, okay, they had their livestock farms and things like that, but they weren't getting their hands dirty. Those are more like fun vacation spots and kind of riding horses. They weren't doing the hard labor. Jimmy Carter was doing the hard
Yeah,
labor.
Ronald Reagan was an actor as a
Yeah.
cowboy.
He wasn't getting his hands dirty. I can tell you that. Not
It
like
looked like he was rugged, but I don't know if he was. I don't
no,
know if he was as rugged as old Jimmy.
no.
Well, let's get it started, man. Let's talk about him,
Right. So,
but
Jimmy
not behind
Carter.
his back.
Not behind his back.
Okay.
No. So James Earl Carter Jr., that's his full name. He was born in 1924 in Plains, Georgia. And he was actually, actually not again, I didn't mention this yet. I feel like I've mentioned it because I've listened to so much about it, but he was actually the first American president to be born in a hospital. So pretty interesting. There's a lot of firsts here that you're going to hear today related to a U.S. president. So he was born to James Earl, who was a bright, hardworking, very good businessman whose ancestors had actually lived in America since the 1630s and residents of Georgia since just after the Revolution. So very long American legacy on his father's side. And his mother, Ms. Lillian, who was a trained nurse who crossed the then strict lines of segregation by caring and counseling poor African women and children. And so the family moved to this 360-acre farm in Archery, Georgia, just out of Plains, Georgia in 1928. And just to give you some context, so Archery doesn't really exist as a town anymore. It's basically been incorporated into Plains. And Plains at the time was really the bustling center for, these small hamlets, if you will, in the surrounding area. So the Carter home was really a reflection of rural life in the 1930s. The family didn't have electricity until 1938, and so they relied on fireplaces and wood stoves for heat. And the farm's adjacent store, which they ran, that was part of their farming operation, sold everything from canned goods to homemade syrup, shoes, overalls. And so workers and neighbors could basically buy goods at that store on credit and then pay their bills on Saturday, which was their payday. And so Carter grew up in a world that just seemed completely frozen in time. And he describes this one in his book, in his child, as basically resembling farm life from 2,000 years ago, more so than modern farming. And his family's farm became really the cradle of his character, values, and later political ambitions. And you'll see that and hear that as we walk through this timeline of his life. So what defined that farm? Well, surprise, surprise, peanuts. Peanuts was definitely a big piece or a big crop on that farm. And Carter's father, Earl, actually began cultivating them when Jimmy was just a boy. And early on, they grew small Spanish peanuts, which were highly versatile. So you could use them in everything from salted snacks to candy bars and even hog feed. So a pretty, handy crop to have in terms of different markets you can go to with it. And one detail I absolutely loved, and there are many of them in his book, but this one was really well painted. So by the time Jimmy was 5, he was already something of an entrepreneur. He was basically selling boiled peanuts on the streets of Plains. And so he'd get up early on Saturday morning. He'd fill up his buckets with choice peanuts. He'd then wash and boil them in salt water. He'd rush through his morning farm chores. And then after breakfast, walk along the railroad tracks to Plains, carrying these baskets full of salted peanuts. And he'd sell the peanuts for a nickel a bag. And at the end of the day, he would generally earn about $1. And that was quite impressive for the Great Depression era, which is, again, the period that we're talking about with him as a little kid. And so by the time actually that he was 10, Jimmy was stacking produce from the family farm onto wagons, hauling it into town and selling it. And he actually saved his money. And by the age of 13, he bought 5 tenant houses around Plains that the Great Depression had put on the market at rock bottom prices. And these homes were then rented to families in the area. And we're going to talk a little bit about tenant farming and things like this because it's a big piece of what farm life looked like then. But so just keep that in mind. But it's just impressive that he was able to collect that kind of money and just really get involved in responsibility of buying something and taking care of it and renting it. And so the Carter farm was a hub of activity. It was growing cotton, sugar cane, vegetables, also raising livestock. And most of their food was also raised on the farm. So they had sweet potatoes, which are a major part of the family's diet. They had other crops that were raised there, like watermelons, corn, black-eyed peas, cabbage, Irish potatoes, pecans, which his mother was actually in charge of. That was her passion, and that was it's actually an interesting story there as well, where uh, his mother would tell his father, saying like, these pecans are my trees, my responsibility, and I will bring them to market, and any money I make will be mine. And so, which I think is pretty progressive for the era. So she had her own income from these pecans that she would use to buy, clothing for the kids or whatever else. And so everyone pitched in during the harvest time, and Carter vividly recalls the peanut harvest as a community affair. It involved every able-bodied person on the farm, and he even wrote about the labor-intensive process, describing how a thresher, or picker, as he calls it, separated the peanuts from their vines, and the dried vines were baled for animal feed, and the peanuts were then hauled off in wagons. And it was just this massive operation, but one that really ended up shaping his work ethic along with all the other responsibilities he had on the farm. Um, but it wasn't all, I mean, for anybody that's been on a farm, even if you have not lived on a farm or worked on a farm or just visited a farm, it's not all, you know, idyllic surroundings and activities. And there's one particular task that Carter really despised, and that was mopping cotton. And so mopping cotton is basically a result of boll weevils, and these insects were a particular menace to cotton crops, and farmers fought them by using this sticky concoction of arsenic, molasses, and water. So you can just imagine the mess of something like that. And he wrote about how this syrupy mixture would cling onto his legs and clothes while he was trying to apply this concoction to each individual cotton plant. And as that concoction would start dripping onto his clothes and his skin and all this stuff, it would start attracting these swarms of flies. And then at night, his trousers would be so stiff, because remember, this is dried molasses, his dried sugar. You know what happens when that it solidifies, that he stood them in the corner like a sculpture. Like that's how stiff his trousers ended up being. So it's almost comical, except for, of course, the grueling labor involved. And so it's no wonder Carter developed a deep respect for the land and those who worked it. But there was also a sense of community on the farm, beyond all the hard work. And like most archery residents, the Carter farm wasn't just a family operation. Jimmy was the eldest of the Carter siblings. He also had two younger sisters, and then a brother much later on, when Jimmy turned 13, his youngest brother came around. So there's obviously a lot more bodies on the farm helping out here. So, like I said, they employed day laborers, tenant farmers, and sharecroppers. And these were basically farmers who worked the land for a share of the crop. So, somewhat like of a step just above slavery, if you will. So it's like that transition, right? Because remember, 1930s, we're only about, give or take, 60 years past the Civil War. And the Clarks, a black family who lived and worked on the Carter farm, played a formative role in Jimmy's childhood. Rachel Clark, in particular, became this pivotal figure in young Jimmy's life. And Rachel Clark was more than just worker. She was a second mother to Carter, when Carter's mother was nursing in the community and had to leave for many hours during the day. Jimmy would go and spend time with Rachel, and Rachel would teach him about fishing and about life, about nature. And it was really these early interactions, particularly with the Black community in archery, that helped Jimmy shape his later commitment to civil rights that we'll see a little bit later. So Carter's early years weren't just about hard work. They were formative in a broader sense, right? His fascination with the world beyond Georgia was also sparked. And that came through the subtle use of postcards from his uncle, Tom Gordy, who served in the Navy. And those postcards ignited these dreams of adventure and service, eventually leading Carter to the U.S. Naval Academy. And by the time he actually graduated high school in 1941, Carter had already laid the groundwork for his future, both as this leader and a man of deep convictions. So from selling peanuts to mopping cotton, these humble beginnings would ultimately shape who would be the 39th president of the United States. But Patrick, I've spoken a lot. Let's now look what happens to Jimmy after he leaves the farm for college.
Old Jimmy, good old Jimmy, from Navy to peanut farmer. You can't get better than that.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, you could if he was a citrus farmer.
Yeah.
You could get better. I mean, I'm just saying.
Uh,
Listen, or grapes,
Yeah.
anything with a little bit of a snack, if you know what I'm saying, John.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty cool, though. I mean, I have not done as much learning and watching what you have. I did see 60 Minutes the other day, did a special on Jimmy, and I definitely want to watch that. I'm gonna look up some other history facts because obviously I did not know he was the last or was an American farmer. Just because again, it wasn't my era. He was born in 1924, and obviously, this is going all the way into this, the 70s. It's just like I said, it's different for us. And yeah, I mean, yes, the gentleman was what was he 99? I think it was
100.
Oh, he was. He was actually 100. Yeah.
The oldest living, with the longest lifespan
President.
as president. Yeah.
It's amazing. I mean, could you imagine? I mean, just going off subject here for a second, could you imagine though being 99 years old, turning 100? So many times as you look, like I turned 40 this year, and it's like, yeah, I'm 40. I still feel like I'm younger, but what do you feel like when you're 99 and you're sitting there going, decades, like you're 100 years old?
Well, that's the thing with Jimmy, though, right? I mean,
I'd like to know his diet.
I mean, he was going until basically the last year of his life. It was only until the last year of his life he said, "All right, I gotta, stop what I'm doing, enjoy the rest of my life," because he knew, things were getting more.
And a year is not enough to enjoy.
But he enjoyed doing what he did, the giving back to community and helping the greater good. I mean, that was his passion, and he did that like till he was 98, 99. I mean, it's
100%.
incredible, like you say. I mean, he obviously didn't feel 98 or 97 when he was doing that. I mean, he was
maybe because he stopped. That's when he started passing. I mean, a lot of times they say that, when you slow down later in life.
Your body. He might have just said,
or his body was telling him, right?
It's time to slow down and just
your
enjoy.
body will tell you, So, but John, there's something so coincidentally American about this story, though.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a tale of duty, family, resilience. 1 minute Carter's a lieutenant in the U.S. Navy, which we just said, he's going to Navy, working on the cutting edge USS Seawolf, which is these nuclear submarines. And the next, he's back in rural Georgia, grappling with drought, debt, and mules. It's like Odysseus returning home, not to Ithaca, but to the red clay fields of Plains.
And it's crazy and quite the shift, I would say. Let's set the stage. Carter, okay, our buddy Jimmy. I'm just going to call him Jimmy. Why are we going to call him Carter? Is that like a respect? I like Jimmy. I mean, I only know one Jimmy in my life, so I'm going to call him. Listen, Jimmy had a promising naval career, and even working on nuclear submarines was one of his, I would say, top-notch things he was doing, right? Nuclear submarines. So, but in 1953, his father, Earl, passed away, leaving behind a struggling farm and a seed supply business. Despite his wife, Rosalind's reluctance, Jimmy made the life-altering decision to resign his commission and return home. And what in return it was? Plains, Georgia. It was a small town with a population of fewer than 700 people. Now, Jimmy found himself managing hundreds of acres of farmland, running Carter's warehouse, and learning the ropes of the peanut trade. So all during the middle of a harvest season. His uncle Alton had declined to be the executor of Earl's estate, so Jimmy had no choice but to dive in head first. He admitted he knew next to nothing about farming, but Alton had a simple philosophy. The best way to learn was to do it. And do it he did. So Jimmy's determination was remarkable. He studied agricultural techniques, attended workshops, and experimented with different crops. And while the first year was disastrous, 1954 brought a terrible drought and the farm barely broke even. He wasn't deterred. In fact, that year introduced him to a peanut variety that would change everything. The Virginia Bunch 67. Now, unlike the other failing crops, it thrived. Sensing opportunity, Carter shifted his focus to producing seed peanuts, which proved far more profitable than just selling certified seed. So, his engineering background, it came in handy, everyone. He modernized the farm, building peanut shelling plants, storage facilities, and even designing new equipment to make farming more efficient. Carter's warehouse became the go-to hub for farmers across the region. But Carter wasn't just building a business. He was navigating a South in turmoil. By the late 1950s, the civil rights movement was gaining momentum. In 1958, Carter was pressured to join the White Citizens Council, an organization dedicated to preserving segregation. And here's where Carter's character truly shines. He refused to join. The only white man in Plains to take such a stand. His business suffered as locals boycotted him, but he held his ground and very firm he was. Over time, the boycott fizzled out, and Carter's reputation as a principled man grew. So the sense of justice carried through his life, from his time as a Sunday school teacher to his later years in politics. But it was his hard work on the farm that laid the groundwork for his rise. By 1959, the farm was thriving, and Carter had become deeply involved in his community, serving on local boards and expanding his agribusiness empire, John.
It's really fascinating, isn't it? I mean,
Wow.
the qualities that made him a successful farmer, that discipline, the innovation, the integrity, these were all the same ones that would later define his presidency at the end of the day. I mean, those are
Absolutely.
really reputable attributes and qualities in any person.
Well, Carter's time on the farm wasn't just a chapter in his life. It was a crucible. And that, John, is why history always returns to the soil. It shapes not just crops, but character.
Beautifully said, Patrick.
You like that? I'm just saying.
Well, shall we take a break here?
Let's do it.
Excellent. So when we return, we'll find out where Carter's path leads next. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the History of Fresh Produce. If you have been with us since the first part of this episode, we have just finished talking about Carter's turnaround of his family farm business in Plains, Georgia. It's the late 1950s. He's getting more involved in his local community. And now, Patrick, we are getting more into the political theater that
what I'd say, from peanut farmer to
the White House.
The White House, baby. Well,
that's right.
Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah. So again, Jimmy Carter, right? It's a name that conjures up, especially when you think of his presidency, of peanuts and the Southern charm and this uniquely moral brand of politics. But how, again, did this man from Plains, Georgia, a population of just 700 people, go from running a farm supply business to becoming the 39th president of the United States? Seems like a pretty big stretch, right?
It's an amazing stretch, John. And I think I was, it's funny, as I was just thinking about that in my head, I was like, from running a nation, right? From peanut farms to running
a nation. If you went from your citrus business to becoming president of the United States.
Could still happen.
It could.
Could still happen. I mean, I got to be 77 though. Like, no one accepts presidents anymore that are, that are in their prime of their life. But hey, maybe we'll get there.
Maybe.
But John, Carter's political career was just, over to say, fascinating. As it's unconventional as it was too, right? It all began in 1955. When he ran for a seat on the Sumter County Board of Education. A humble start, but it wasn't long before Carter set his sights higher. By 1962, a new seat in the Georgia State Senate opened up. Thanks to federally ordered reappointment, Carter seized the opportunity, but his path to victory was anything but smooth. Now, before you say something, John, what's interesting enough is we have a friend that was in the state Senate in Georgia.
Oh, yeah.
Which is Stephanie Stuckey, who is a pecan farmer.
There you go.
Or pecan, depends on how you want to say it.
Yes.
And to this day, if you followed Stephanie Stuckey, wow, what a woman, what a farmer, right? I mean, served under, I believe she did under the Attorney General. Like, again, farming people, there's a reason why farming and politics mix. So go ahead,
Oh,
John.
absolutely. And what you just described, I mean, his path being to victory, but anything but smooth in that Senate Georgia Senate race, is putting it mildly. I mean, the election was marred by blatant vote fraud. I mean, his opponents had basically registered fictitious voters in alphabetical order, nonetheless, even using names of the deceased. But Carter, even ever the determined reformer, exposed the fraud in court, and the fraudulent votes were then thrown out. And as a result, he won his seat and began making waves as a moderate in a state still obviously very divided by segregation.
Yeah. Wow. Again, the more we learn about this guy, I'm like with you now, like the more, the better. And yes, and during his 2 terms in the Georgia Senate, Carter carved out a reputation as tough and an independent operator, John.
Oh yeah.
Right? So he really pushed, okay? He pushed to eliminate wasteful government spending and fought to repeal laws designed to suppress African American voting rights. This was no small feat in a region still clinging to its Jim Crow past. I mean, we are in the South, everyone, as South as you can get next to Florida. Okay. So his moral convictions weren't limited to politics, though. A telling moment came when his church voted on whether to admit Black worshipers. Almost everyone voted against integration, except for Jimmy and Rosalind. So the dynamic duo, they did not vote with, they voted against. And I love that. Their quiet defiance was a testament to their deeply held principles, even when it meant standing alone, John. And by the early 1970s, Carter was ready to aim for the governor's mansion. He lost his first campaign, but won on his second try in 1970. And just 6 years later, this peanut farmer turned politician shocked the nation by winning the presidency. His 1976 campaign was a masterclass in grassroots politics. I mean, he even had a peanut brigade.
The Peanut Brigade was brilliant.
I'm just saying.
I mean, for those who don't know who the Peanut Brigade is, because again, this is kind of a bit of a time ago, but we have some listeners, I think, that would remember this. So the Peanut Brigade was basically hundreds of Carter supporters from Georgia that traveled the country campaigning for Carter. And Patrick, let's not forget about the iconic campaign plane, right? Peanut One, you've heard of that one. And obviously the image of Carter as this smiling peanut became this global phenomenon.
It truly has and is a global phenomenon, right, John? And
yeah,
it's, oh man, old Jimmy. And it wasn't just effective marketing. Okay. It was a boon for the peanut. It's up literally, it boomed for the peanut industry. Carter branded peanuts, campaign buttons, even neckties adorned with peanuts became ambiguous. It was probably the best free advertisement the peanut industry ever had. And the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The humble peanut represented Carter's down-to-earth, everyman appeal, a stark contrast to the Watergate tainted politics of the previous admin. So even after becoming president, Carter retained a fondness for peanuts in all their forms, from peanut butter sandwiches to deep fried peanuts. Despite the lightened imagery, Carter's presidency faced serious challenges towards the end of his term. High inflation, high energy crisis, an Iranian hostage situation, yet his commitment to human rights and diplomatic achievements like the Camp David Accords left a lasting legacy, John.
Yeah, it's true. I think a lot of us that follow politics or the history of presidents remember Jimmy Carter primarily for one thing, and that's the Iranian hostage crisis. And it's really an unfair testament to his time in office. I mean, he did a lot in terms of again, civil rights, helping people. He was all about peace. That's all he wanted. He wanted world peace. And a lot of that again stemmed from his life on the farm. I mean, he grew up in this environment, integrated with the African American farmers that worked his land, his family's land, and it's not like he was unique. I mean, there were other kids that lived on farms as well, but I think what was really unique was particularly his mother. I mean, his mother really broke all those boundaries, those expected boundaries of that era that you don't integrate and you don't talk to each other. But she just blew that all out of the water, and Jimmy saw that, and he followed instead, and that really shaped who he was as a person. In addition, of course, to all the the morals he learned and the hard work he learned of being on the farm. But speaking of all this legacy, why don't we now turn to his life in the post presidency?
Let's do it.
And so when Jimmy Carter left the White House in 1981, he didn't exactly retire to a life of quiet reflection. The post presidency of Jimmy Carter is a chapter all of its own. It's a mix of financial struggles, personal reinvention, and global impact. So let's start with the rather rude awakening the Carters received upon returning to Plains. They learned once they got back home that their family farm supply business, which they had actually placed in a blind trust during Carter's presidency, because again, he didn't want to have any sort of conflict of interest or uh, benefits of being president over, his personal business. Uh, but when they returned, they saw that basically their business was over $1 million in debt. And that was a result of a combination of severe drought and poor management, which had brought the business to its knees. And actually, that drought, maybe some people in the peanut industry that might be listening might be familiar during this particular time point. So 1981, it was 1980, I believe, where there was a big peanut shortage. And obviously, Jimmy Carter's farm got caught up in that, and that's what helped contributed to that loss. So yeah, it's rough.
Quite the homecoming, John. What did they do to recover?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to imagine, right? You're leaving the most powerful office in the world only to face personal financial ruin. But Carter didn't wallow in self pity. This is not the kind. I mean, if you've been listening, uh, this is obviously not the kind of person that's going to wallow and say, "Woe is me." So he and Rosalind sold the family business, the farming arm of the business, and began writing books to supplement their income. And that not only helped them recover financially, but also further cemented their role as global figures. And like I said at the top, I mean, I think he's written somewhere close to or around 30 books, and definitely encourage everybody to read some of those because they do offer pretty amazing insights, not just his personal life, but experiences that he had as president, post president. So anyway, getting back to it, that wasn't the only reinvention that he had in terms of reinventing himself. The Carters also owned farmland in Sumter and Webster counties in Georgia. And instead of returning to traditional farming, they transitioned that land into certified tree farms. And it became both economically productive and a haven for wildlife. And this really embodied their deep commitment to conservation and land stewardship. And that stewardship really extended beyond their own land. The Carters became vocal advocates for reforestation, environmental protection, and just sharing their philosophy with the public. And their actions really set an example for sustainable land management, and obviously a legacy that very much resonates in today's environment. But let's not forget about Plains itself. This small town of just 700 people where peanuts remain the backbone of the local economy. Every September still, this town hosts a peanut harvest celebration, which is obviously a nod to its enduring agricultural identity, but also to Carter's own roots as a peanut farmer. And Carter's impact just didn't stop there in Plains. In 1982, the Carters established the Carter Center. And for those who haven't heard of the Carter Center, it's a nonprofit organization that works with Emory University to promote human rights, democracy, and health worldwide. And one of its lesser known but equally impactful initiatives has been its agricultural program, which operated in 15 sub-Saharan African countries between 1986 and 2011. And the results from those initiatives have been pretty remarkable by introducing improved farming techniques, seed production, and crop processing. These programs helped more than 8 million small farmers double or even triple their yields. And in regions where malnutrition posed a constant threat, this was obviously nothing short of life changing. And Carter was on the ground with a lot of these things. He wasn't just sitting in a room, you know, saying, "Yes, I have a nonprofit and I operate it from a comfy space." I mean, he was boots on the ground. He would go there regularly enough. Again, not just for the agricultural initiatives, but for the health initiatives and all these different initiatives that the Carter Center uh, did. And so Carter's efforts remind us that a presidency is not a presidency is just one chapter in a leader's life. His post presidency is a testament, again, to that resilience, that commitment to make the world a better place, even in the face of personal and professional setbacks.
John, it's crazy to see some of those setbacks too. And again, Jimmy Carter, a man of many legacies. John, who would have guessed that one of his most enduring symbols would be a smiling peanut,
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah,
right?
the Jimmy Carter peanut statue, standing at was it 13 feet tall in Plains, Georgia. Uh, for those who don't know this peanut statue, it's basically a monument to Jimmy's agricultural roots in his 1976 presidential campaign. It was built by I believe, the Indiana Democratic Party. It's a cheerful little nod to Carter's time as a peanut farmer, and the peanut itself, the statue, has a grinning face, and it's become quite emblematic of Carter's warm and approachable campaign style.
And that's the peanut statue, right? And what I find so fascinating, John, okay, about the statue's composition, it's made of wooden hoops, chicken wire, aluminum foil, and polyurethane.
Yeah.
It's a true roadside oddity, but one of them embodies Carter's connection to the land and its home, though, right? So, John, it's worth noting that while this peanut is impressive, it's only the second tallest peanut statue in the world. The world's largest peanut resides just a few miles away in Ashburn, Georgia.
Hmm.
This is a state clearly serious about its peanuts, okay? But Carter's legacy goes far beyond statues. His boyhood home and family farm are now part of the Jimmy Carter National Historic Park. Open to the public, it's a living, breathing reminder of its roots. Visitors can see crops like peanuts, sugarcane, and cotton still being grown alongside honeybees, goats, and mules. So, growing up on that farm shaped Carter's character, a strong work ethic, and a commitment to stewardship of the land. His experience managing the farm sparked his interest in environmental issues, which would later lead to the creation of the Department of Energy and the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act during his presidency. The act, by the way, doubled the size of the U.S. national park system and tripled the amount of designated wilderness. Carter also stood out for his commitment to civil rights, shaped by his relationship with African Americans during his youth. He had neighbors that were African Americans, and I always say, what you grow up around is sometimes what shapes your life. And this set him apart from many in the rural South at the time, John.
Mhm.
And we can't forget his time in the Future Farmers of America, the FFA, everyone. That's right. When you were in high school and you saw the FFA, you were like, I'm not joining that. Well, guess what? The Future Farmers of America, what a staple, literally a staple program. Carter served secretary of the Plains High School FFA chapter and remains the only U.S. president who was a member of the organization. In 1979, at the National FFA State President's Conference, Carter even remarked, I can vouch for the fact that's a good preparation for the highest elective office in our nation.
Yeah, the sentiment clearly rooted in his love for agriculture and leadership.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, just what a legacy, Patrick. I mean, Carter's life really reminds us that the skills you pick up on a farm can shape a legacy, and that's both grounded in the soil and reaches obviously the highest levels of government and beyond. And yeah, I mean, you can just see all the things that he achieved again later in life. So much of it you can trace back to those early years of his life on the farm. Simple things. I mean, he again, like I mentioned at the top of the episode, there's so many firsts with him. One of them was he was the first president to get out of a car after being inaugurated and walking down Pennsylvania Ave. You see that a lot now with recent presidents. They walk down Pennsylvania Ave to the White House after they've been inaugurated. Jimmy Carter was the first one to do that. And actually, I believe that was an idea of his son. Um, but again, I think that it's a subtle thing, but it speaks, I think, and is illustrative of his roots. A simple guy, a relatable guy that's been raised on a farm. He doesn't want to sit in a fancy car driving down Pennsylvania. He's going to walk because that's what you do. And other small things. He sold the presidential yacht. I didn't even know there was a presidential yacht before Carter. Apparently, there was a yacht, just like there's Air Force One and other, in the presidential car. There was a presidential yacht that presidents would use to wine and dine, politicians and whatnot. Apparently, Carter said, "Nah, that's kind of a waste of money. I'm going to sell it," and he got rid of that. And yeah, so he just an amazing, amazing person that really did his utmost to not get involved in the political game. I mean, again, listening to a lot of the documentaries of people that worked with him, knew him, both sides of the aisle, as well as in his memoirs, he really wasn't interested in politics. He was interested in doing the right thing. And at the end, doing a lot of the right things ended up actually costing him the election, and ending him as a one-term president. But again, I think regardless of what you think of his policies and his political views, I think it says a lot about his character, the kind of person he was, that he was living life to do good by people and the community. And I think, again, a lot of that was rooted in his experience as a farmer, living in the land, surrounded by people of different colors, different beliefs. And that was just carried through to the final days of his life. So it's just an amazing person. And I hope, we did justice honoring him here through, again, a lens of produce, because again, this for now is the last U.S. farmer president. And Patrick, before we close, I want to close out with a quote by Jimmy
Please.
Carter, if I may. So this is Jimmy Carter. Earlier in my life, I thought the things that mattered were the things that you could see, like your car, your house, your wealth, your property, your office. But as I've grown older, I've become convinced that the things that matter most are the things you can't see, the love you share with others, your inner purpose, your comfort with who you are.
Amazing.
That is Jimmy Carter. So, everybody, thank you again for listening. And until next time, it's goodbye for me, John Papp.
And me, Patrick Kelly.